Hello and welcome to a fresh episode of the College Football Insiders. I am your host, Richard Johnson, joined by my guys, Chris Hummer, Brandon Marcello, and Matt Zenitz. Here from the start of the episode, by the way, breaking news coming from the Insiders. Thanks for joining us here on the show. If you're watching it on YouTube, like and subscribe, hit the bell for notifications for whenever we go live, and in your podcast feed, find us, the College Football Insiders. All right, fellas, don't know if you guys have heard, but Brian Kelly got fired by LSU on Sunday. Yeah, pretty surprising in its specific timing. But in totality, you kind of thought it was breaking a little bad, especially after they lost on Saturday the way that they did. What I kind of want to do here is something that I think is really interesting for our listeners and our viewers. I kind of want to take people like inside the day as we can kind of piece it together, not just in Baton Rouge on Sunday, but at a couple of the recent fires, like Florida, for instance. I think that Florida and LSU were, significantly different in their tenors in that I think we woke up that Sunday morning thinking it was kind of sort of probably going to happen at Florida. I was told that Saturday night after they beat Mississippi State to stay frosty. Whereas it's different on Sunday at LSU, for instance, where you go in thinking, okay, well, Brian Kelly may be making some coordinator changes. And then later in the afternoon, that immediately kind of pivots into what it ended up being. So, Matt, I guess I'll kind of start with you. As best as you can, kind of take us through your day on Sunday and the day in the building at Baton Rouge as best you can.
So Brian Kelly got to the LSU team building around 8:30, 8:45 local time on Sunday. Struggled as John, Chris, and I have talked about when he first arrived there to actually get into the building, which is kind of a weird omen based on how things played out. But they have like a little finger system to get in where it recognizes your finger to get you into the building. And he couldn't get in. It wasn't recognizing his finger. So he was struggling with that for a couple minutes and getting frustrated before finally being able to get into the building. Ultimately gets in, begins the process of having communication regarding the potential of staff changes, specifically at the OC spot. And as the day progressed, he went from some morning meetings, morning communication, to meeting with Scott Woodward around lunchtime. And that meeting, just based on how it's been described to me, was essentially the beginning of the end. The meeting went poorly and led to both of them being frustrated, conservative way of putting it, and not being happy with how the meeting went. Brian left the LSU team building shortly after that. That obviously served as a red flag for people on staff who were around the building at that time and aware of just that meeting going poorly, and then seeing Brian leave shortly afterward. And then there was communication that went on throughout the course of the next several hours that culminated in Brian being fired as LSU's head coach. But frankly, this was different than, like you were talking about, the Florida situation. There was no way at all going into the day Sunday that I thought Brian Kelly was going to be fired. I thought there were going to be changes to the staff, again, specifically with the offensive coordinator spot. I believe from everything I've heard, that was Brian Kelly's expectation also, and that he had no expectation on his end that the day would end with him being out as LSU's head coach. But lo and behold, here we are.
Yeah, and here we are indeed. Brandon, kind of swing it to you next. When we talk about, let's talk about the day in Gainesville the week before, right, where Billy Napier is out. Like I said, like all four of us, you're staying frosty that Saturday night. You're kind of waking up, sending some initial texts out to some folks. Hey, let me know what's going on. It kind of seemed like from my end, we got to probably around like 11 a.m.-ish, and things were kind of status quo. Florida obviously had a bye week, right? And so the players were coming in a little bit later that afternoon. There was a team meeting scheduled for, I believe, around 4 p.m. And then the coaches were supposed to come in sort of early afternoon around lunchtime, like 1 or 2. And there was supposed to be kind of like a regularly scheduled kind of staff meeting going on that mid-afternoon. So it was kind of status quo through the morning. It was texting some people. Yeah, there's some recruits here on unofficials. There's some guys taking them around, but, everything is kind of chill, even though everybody's kind of waiting for this kind of dark cloud to potentially happen. But then things kind of kicked into gear, at least on that Sunday afternoon at Florida, very quickly. And then it becomes like, oh, there's going to be an emergency staff meeting or an unscheduled staff meeting that wasn't very long on the calendar. And then we go into the team meeting that was the formal announcement to the team, at least, that Billy Napier was going to be out.
Yeah, as you mentioned, like the coaches were scheduled to meet. I think something like around like 1:00 was originally scheduled. So of course, some of them came in early to start doing some work, and we're just plowing ahead like everything was normal. Even though a few days earlier, everybody kind of knew that this was probably happening, but they hadn't been told anything yet. So you just keep working, and then you start hearing things. You haven't seen Billy Napier yet at the facility, and then it kind of just happened quickly, as you said, within about 45 minutes span. It went from, well, I'm doing my job, doing my thing, to, apparently we're meeting here soon. Looks like it's done. And then, that staff meeting is, 15 minutes, I think, before they call it impromptu team meeting. Everybody knew at that point what was about to happen. I will say this: if you're like a local beat reporter covering one of these teams, my best advice to you now is to go stalk your head coach's house the morning after a big game where you think they might be on the hot seat or getting out, because a lot of these ADs, in fact, I think every single one I could think of in middle of the year so far this year, other than Brian Kelly, because that was a different situation, they've gone to the house. They've gone to the coach's house and delivered the news in person, which is pretty usual, unless the coach is already there in the office at, like, say 6 or 8 a.m. But most of them usually aren't on Sunday mornings.
Like Colorado State, for example, that was something in office, but yeah,
there
conversations that take place in person.
Yeah, there's some things that can kind of throw this out of whack, Chris. Like, so for the Colorado State example, they had played on Friday. If I think I'm right on that.
I can't remember stuff from 2 days ago. Yeah, just right now.
Matt Zenit's memory, who knows? But with situations like Florida and LSU, the interesting things were they were both home games, right? So there's no travel, there's no team playing back, there's no like late thing. I remember Brandon and I a few weeks before Sam Pittman actually got fired, had heard that they were talking about this like openly on the team plane coming back from Memphis. And then there was a point in time where like Brandon and I were texting back and forth. We couldn't talk to anybody because they were on the team plane, like literally in the air. So it's interesting how these things kind of shake out. Chris, as far as like the direct circle of who knows what, like specifically when, like one of the things that I really appreciate about this group is that like, look, it's not fired until it's fired. Like, all of us plan to eat dinner, but we can go to a restaurant, we can order, and the food can be in front of us. But until you eat dinner, you haven't eaten dinner. And I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of people should remember in these situations. But Chris, as you kind of track both these situations, we were on the phone on Sunday about LSU, of course, together as well. Like, how did it come across kind of on your end, how the day unfolded on Sunday?
Well, I guess to reiterate what Matt said, I don't think anybody at LSU was expecting Brian Kelly to be out going into the day. I remember talking to a couple of people on staff that morning, kind of checking in about the offensive coordinator situation with Joe Sloan. And somebody kind of put it to me that day that everybody on staff was just kind of desk guarding. Like they were mulling around, like kind of wondering what's going to happen, assuming something was going to happen, but nothing had happened yet. And then Matt kind of took you through the blow by blow, but by the middle of the afternoon on Sunday, I know you said it's not done until it's done, but I think several of us talked to people over there and they all thought it was done, right? Like, this is one of those situations.
There was like a meeting where like people left that meeting, staffers left that meeting, as I understand it, thinking that it was done or would be done soon.
Is that when they were told to go home?
Yeah, like 3-ish, somewhere around that end.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll say this, not to cut Chris off, but like there were things going on throughout the course of that day, including meetings with administrator type people with Frank Wilson. With Frank is the only member of the coaching staff in there, and knowing just the likelihood at that point that Frank was going to be the interim or that he was in line to be the interim if something happened, that was something where for me, just reading between the lines, you start to get a sense of just the growing likelihood of something happening. And you guys also know me well enough that like if I put something out that something's trending in a certain direction, that there's a certain expectation that's there that's stronger than maybe what the presentation is on Twitter. And that's something that when Chris, John, and I put that out, the way it was presented, it was that it was done at that point. Like, it's over with. That was the exact quote from top source in that situation. It's over with, which frankly had come an hour or so before that, and it just continued to work during the hour following hearing that to get additional information, and got a little bit during the course of that hour that combined with hearing that from the person who had shared that. It was just clear at that point that even though we went with it's currently trending towards parting ways, knew that barring a significant 180, it was done.
Chris, sorry about that. I was an idiot, and like early afternoon was like, I think we're going to be okay here. So I actually went to a friend's house and was helping him paint his walls because he was moving out. So I had a paintbrush in one hand, helping patch up holes, and I'm on the phone with Chris and Matt trying to figure it out. Chris,
I was meeting my friend Will and Annabelle's baby for the first time, and I quite literally was stepping out of the house to take multiple calls about the LSU situation throughout the afternoon and early evening. It's just kind of I'm sure Matt and Brandon also have stories about what they were doing that afternoon, but it's just kind of the reality of it. Like,
I was playing 500 with the neighborhood kids. You guys remember 500?
Yeah.
Jackpot? Is that what you're saying?
Yep. Yeah,
okay.
Jackpot. Yeah.
Nice. I was sitting out back for the better part of 12 hours on Sunday. Our Lanai area out back, we have like a bird's nest chair, or whatever the best way is of describing that. Was sitting in that for the better part of 12 hours, aside from like periodic trips inside the house, just when God breaks from the phone. But I just
imagine Matt sitting out there just getting lifts in, like in between calls, just like gotta get it in sometime.
Can't do that. Is it a wicker chair? Is it a wicker chair?
I'll send you guys a picture of it. But the only thing I was lifting up or lifting that day was my phone.
So Chris, especially as someone who is really locked in with players and player representatives and parents and families and that sort of stuff, when something like this happens on the players' end, especially because they're guessing, but like the players are kind of often the last to find out in one of these situations.
The players are always the last to find out in these situations. A lot of times, like, we know how this works. Like, a lot of times the news breaks before the team meeting starts, right? That was the case with Brad Kelly. The news broke. A team meeting was called at 8, and I think officially was fired by like 7:04. And Matt, John, and I had put out that report much earlier in the day about like likely out, and we're expecting him to be. So the players often are. There are some situations, especially, I don't want to say with smaller programs, but with programs with less of a media spotlight, where the players can sometimes find out ahead of time and they actually get to have that team meeting and tell the players. But yeah, usually like players also have no idea what's going on, and player representatives have no idea what's going on in these situations until they're told, because it's a small circle, then it's usually the staff, and then it's usually a team meeting. And the likelihood of it not getting out before that staff or after that staff meeting occurs is pretty low in this era of college football. So yeah, those guys are on the team are usually pretty in the dark in these situations. They're guessing. Like, for example, y'all talked about the Arkansas situation 3 weeks ago. I know several Florida State players thought Mike Norvell was going to be out after the loss to Stanford, but like that's ultimately an educated guess on their part. So those guys are just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen in most of those cases.
99% of the time this gets out before players find out. At least 50% of the time, if not greater, it gets out before assistant coaches and the staff as a whole finds out. But the norm when it comes to these, aside from like Chris mentioned, some G5 type situations, like I think back to Kennesaw State last year, that was one that players had been informed, and there was like a decent gap between players finding out and then that ultimately getting out. But most of the time, it does not get to the point where players are informed prior to that hitting the media.
Brandon, one of the most interesting things to me about the Brian Kelly fallout right now is that we still don't know the buyout situation, and it's been what, 72? Yeah, it's been 72 hours now. Yeah, obviously they will honor the contract right now, but the contract says a certain thing: $54-ish million paid out over the rest of his deal to, I think it's to 2032. That's what the contract says.
I don't think it's going to be 54.
Right, I don't either. I think in a lot of these situations, you go to Brian, you say, hey, there's a number between 0 and 54 million. Let's find it, and maybe we can get you more money in your pocket sooner. Brandon, you covered a situation at Arkansas, for instance, where Sam Pittman was like, yeah, that clause in there that says I got to look for work. How about we get rid of that, and I'll give you a little bit of money back.
Yeah, what's fascinating is in Brian Kelly's contract, he has similar language in there. You have to go look for employment or whatever. But I know Tom Mars, who's a prominent attorney who's actually sued schools and their foundations over buyout money, was actually looking at Brian Kelly's contract and was putting out on social media that clause in Brian Kelly's contract is literally just one sentence. There's no explanation of how do you prove that you went after jobs or anything like that. Meanwhile, in other coaches' contracts,
Brandon. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. It's funny because Richard and I were, I think, literally yesterday talking about that exact sentence.
In good faith, baby.
Yeah. So that's interesting, right? It's not like one of those situations where I don't know, like, how do you even if the clause in there is longer or whatever, like, so do you literally have to forward emails? Like, here's the athletics director, so-and-so emailing my agent to set up a time. Like, what are we doing?
I remember he is currently a Power 4 head coach, but I remember he told me, I got fired from my last job, and I absolutely took an interview I was not planning on taking the job, but I took the interview so that the news of the interview would leak so that I could satisfy the clause in my contract that said I had to look for work. That is certainly common.
Yeah.
Funny with Brian Kelly, by the way. So I have no idea what his thought process is in terms of like whether he wants to be a head coach again coming out of this. But it's interesting with this cycle. Some of the other prominent coaches that you've seen fired, with James Franklin, Billy Napier, it's continued to come across like those guys, even with like James, for example, having the $50 million buyout or whatever it was from Penn State, that there's a legitimate interest on their end with James Franklin, Billy Napier to get back into this at some point soon, potentially even as soon as this cycle, even though with Brian Kelly, I'm not sure what the thought process is.
I know, who else wants to get right back into it? Mike Gundy.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these guys that exactly. I mean, I don't know who's going to pick them up, but a lot of these guys that are being fired want to get back into it. Sam Pittman's happy to kind of sit on the beach possibly, or maybe just go be an O-line coach somewhere else and maybe win another title. But a lot of these guys want to go be head coaches again. And that's what's going to be fascinating, is to see, like, yes, James Franklin's going to be very much in demand. I don't know about Napier as far as like, power gigs, but some of these schools that'll have openings, like, do we all of a sudden see Mike Gundy or Billy Napier pop up in interviews at UAB or some of these, group of 6 schools?
Wow,
that's something we haven't really talked about yet, because we haven't seen that possibility. But a lot of these retreads, if they really want to keep coaching, that's probably where we're going to hear their names this year.
I would say with Billy Napier, there are, and some of this, as you guys know, that there's a domino effect component of the coaching cycle. Let's say hypothetically, some of these American coaches who are going to be in the mix for P4 opportunities end up landing something. I could see somebody like a Billy Napier being an attractive candidate for one of these American type jobs.
Chris, go ahead.
I could see a Mike Gundy being a potential candidate at a Colorado State job, because he has a home in Colorado. I think there's a desire for Mike Gundy to keep coaching. And to Brandon's point, I think people forget these guys are kind of their own cottage industries. Like, they employ a lot of people. They have a lot of friends. Like in Mike Gundy's case, you have a brother who wants to be in coaching. You have family members who want to be in coaching. Sometimes, like, these coaches keep coaching so their families can keep coaching, or they're like lifelong confidants can keep coaching. So there are more reasons than just money for these people to keep going. It's competitiveness and also all the people they can help employ.
These guys are also
their entire life, and it's tough to move on from something that I'm sure a large part of just them identity-wise, that they view themselves as being a coach, and it's probably tough to move on from. Okay, can I just throw out one final thing with LSU? All I want to see with LSU, so I'm sure you guys have seen some of this recently with Coach O, with Ed Orgeron and his interest in getting back to coaching, whether it's a head coaching opportunity or potentially even like the right assistant job. I would love to see a scenario where I have like Lane Kiffin get hired at LSU, has a close relationship with Coach O, and brings him in as like the D-line coach at LSU. Regardless of how that ended there, I think LSU people would love to have him back in the building in that kind of capacity. It would be a fun scenario.
Two former Ole Miss head coaches on the same LSU football staff would just be really quite something. But Matt's point, I think, is really important. Like, these guys are, like, they are hardwired to do a certain thing. And I mean, like, we are too. Like, I don't know. I have never worked in another reporting job outside of college football, to be honest with you. Like, this is all I've ever done too, personally. Like, I do think it would be very destabilizing personally if I didn't have the rhythms that the season affords us, right? Like, there are just certain things that happen. There are certain games that happen. I know it's a little bit earlier this year, but like, typically this is the time when you start to see coaches get fired, for instance. And this is the time we start to lose our Sundays, even though, again, we've lost some Sundays to the job earlier this year than we typically do. But there are different things. Like, we're all going to start to kind of lock in really nitty gritty on portal stuff here in the next couple weeks. Like, that's kind of a thing that happens to our calendar. So yeah, like, our calendars are tied to this thing as well. And I can just imagine what it would be like to have that ripped away, especially when you go into, Saturday evening. Brian Kelly was the coach of LSU, and Sunday morning, he figured he'd be the coach of LSU with a couple changes to his staff. And by Sunday evening at dinner time, he's no longer the coach of LSU. I mean, I saw some picture yesterday when he was just sitting at some restaurant in the middle of a Monday afternoon eating lunch instead of being at, like, the press conference, right? And, like, Brian Kelly's done that in 4 jobs in a row: Cincinnati, Notre Dame, Grand Valley, or Central Michigan before that. Like, that's just what he does. That's who he is. And just, I think that is always a fascinating thing about the psychology of these guys when it comes down to it. All right, we good here? We good on LSU? We will certainly and obviously come back to that saga as we move through the silly season. When we come back to the show here on the College Football Insiders, we're going to talk about some surprising contenders. Maybe they shouldn't have been so surprising in the end.
This is European soccer's biggest stage.
Written in the stars! What a difference she has made!
The question is, can you handle it?
Can you handle it?
The crowd here feels electric. Stream every match of the UEFA Women's Champions League on Paramount+.
Welcome back to the College Football Insiders. All right, guys, let's talk a little bit on the field now about some of the more surprising contenders in college football and kind of how they were built. We'll talk Virginia. We'll talk Indiana, which is certainly not that surprising of a contender if you go back to what happened last year. We're going to talk Cincinnati and Houston. Let's start with Virginia. Virginia 7-1 so far this season. They are through, frankly, the easy portion of their schedule. It was a situation where coming into this season, I think you could have expected a hot start, a decent start with the schedule that Virginia had in the beginning. I don't think any of us really expected this. You go back to last season, Virginia had a mystery donor who will remain nameless, who injected a lot of money into their program. They were able to hit the portal pretty decent, but they had an offensive lineman that went down in spring ball, a transfer from Louisville, and it was kind of like that was a tough blow for them. He was going to be one of their better players, but they have other good offensive linemen, including center Braylon Moore is a great player up front for them. And Virginia now sits with Chandler Morris as their quarterback in, frankly, one of the pole positions to play for the ACC championship in a couple of weeks here. They're 4-0, obviously, in the league so far this season. So what do we think of this Virginia team, how they're built, and how they've been able to do this? Chris, I'll start with you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is the prime example of what happens in the rev share era, in addition to some extra NIL money. This is a team that had been pretty non-competitive under Tony Elliott. Obviously, some very difficult circumstances for him early in his tenure with what happened to a couple of his players. But this is a team and a coach that came into the season with a lot of question marks and very much in the hot seat. And what Virginia did was they went all in. With this year, they invested in their coach. They gave him the resources necessary to attack the portal, a top 25 class, 31 transfers. And as you said, Richard, a couple of guys have gotten hurt, but they were able to build depth through the portal that just hasn't been there in years past. And in Chandler Morris, a 7-figure quarterback, I think that might surprise some people, but he was a 7-figure quarterback this year. They have a much steadier guide and a much steadier hand and somebody who can be the trigger and point person for that offense. And it makes a huge difference. They don't turn the ball over nearly as much as they did a season ago with Anthony Colandera, essentially calling the shots for the offense. I think Tony Elliott finally has a trigger man who works for them. And you make that many upgrades in your roster in a league like the ACC that is very winnable, and you get a team that can be 7-1, even if that 7-1 is by winning 3 straight overtime games and avoiding overtime against Washington State with the safety. It's been perilous, but they're winning games, and that's really all that matters.
Yeah, I think Tony Elliott's done a great job getting this thing on the right foot. We'll see what happens moving forward from Virginia. Indiana, a contender, certainly. I did not think they were going to take that much of a step back before the season started. I thought the world of Fernando Mendoza as a player. I thought some of the transfers they brought in, including up front, with some of the linemen that they brought in, I think we're going to be really good. And obviously, they replaced their best defensive players last year at all 3 levels. So yes, there were a little bit of a depth concern, but when you looked at that roster, you look at that coaching staff, which almost all of it came back from last year besides Tino Cincinnati, and you thought, all right, well, I think the floor here is pretty decent. We'll see what the ceiling looks like. And Matt, looks like the ceiling's pretty damn good at Indiana right now. So is Indiana a surprise to you that they remain this good?
To a certain degree, but they were fortunate to add Fernando Mendoza, who's a first-round prospect at quarterback. They have a terrific coaching staff. The main question that I have with Indiana is just how realistic it is to maintain and sustain this after this year once they lose some of those pieces like Fernando Mendoza.
Yeah, the portal will come a calling for them as well. We'll see. I think they've got more backing monetarily that I think is going to be fascinating in order to keep that staff together. That was a credit to Indiana's staff and Indiana's athletic director, Scott Dolson. I think it's very interesting that Curt Cignetti handled this negotiation the way that he did. And the way that he did was, talk to my reps, and the reps got it done within 48 hours. Whereas you've got a situation, you have other situations, I should say, in the country right now, where you've got coaches that seem penciled in for one job or the other, and they have not made the quick decisions that Curt Cignetti did to get out in front of the cycle at large. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. All right, let's talk Big 12 real quick. Cincinnati and Houston, Chris Hummer country down there. Cincinnati 7-1 so far. Under Willie Fritz, under Scott Satterfield, who was a coach who has, under the gun, is probably a charitable way to put it, as far as Scott Satterfield at Louisville, at Cincinnati. Good night. It was a situation where he came into this season, and I think people thought,
Scott, in all fairness to you, Scott Satterfield has been the head coach at Louisville. Like, you're good there. You're good. It makes sense.
Thank you. And had the situation where, like, he literally had to say that I went after the South Carolina job. Sorry, didn't mean to do that. So he came in this season as like a soft hot seat guy, I think.
More than soft, I would argue.
Okay.
They absolutely had to win.
Okay. And they won, and they have. Brandon Sorsby, besides week 1 against Nebraska, Sorsby's been nails. I mean, he's been Sorsby has been literally one of the least sacked, if not the least sacked quarterback in the country. And what I think is interesting here regarding Cincinnati is the Big 12 race really does roll through them. I mean, it's Utah and BYU come a-calling in November. So they're going to have the fate of the league. And look, it's Big 12, so everybody's got 1 or 2 losses right now. The fate of the league really does run through Cincinnati right now. Cincinnati is conference undefeated, obviously.
And they get TCU. They get TCU at season's end, and they're a 2-loss team as well. Three of the 7 teams really in the mix of the Big 12 have to play Cincinnati.
Whereas Houston is a little bit of a different slate coming home here. And I'm interested to see, Brandon, how this Big 12 race shakes out with Cincinnati and Houston as surprise contenders.
Yeah, I mean, Cincinnati, you look at it, the toughest stretch of their season is the one that's coming up with the 2 top other contenders really in the Big 12 starting this week, with going to with Utah on the schedule. The problem for them is as you mentioned, they're on this stretch run. They've won 7 straight. Brendan Sorsby's only been sacked twice, I think, all season. He's been remarkable. 20 touchdown passes, 1 pick. He's rushed for 7 scores. They've got great speed on the outside, but they're about to face, I think, the toughest defenses they faced all year. And they're also going to be in a situation where going to Utah, where I think Utah has just shown that if you come to Salt Lake City, they're going to make mincemeat out of you. You're going to have to go into the grinder and play their style of ball to beat them. Texas Tech obviously just completely overwhelmed them, but they're the only team that's really shown that there in Salt Lake City this year. But if Cincinnati, I'll say this, Cincinnati doesn't even have to beat Utah, in my opinion. If they could be very competitive against Utah on the road, I still like Cincinnati potentially to be in the Big 12 championship game, because as we mentioned, you get to come back home and play Arizona, which has been kind of dangerous, sneaky dangerous at times. You're going to play them at home. You're going to play BYU at home. Listen, BYU, I hate saying lucky, but BYU, all these rallies in the fourth quarter, rarely.
It's okay. You can say lucky. Like, you can look at the expected win graphs. Like, they are not expected to win a lot of these games. It's 2 years in a row with this.
You just don't.
They are God's chosen team. Clearly, that makes all the sense in the world.
You just don't come back from double digits in the fourth quarter 3 to 4 times in a season, right? And they've done it twice, and that's at home. If they can play close against Utah, they don't have to win. And if the rest of this slate sets up very well for them, even though it is the toughest stretch. But if they go to Utah and get their clocks cleaned, I think it's going to be very hard for Cincinnati to get off the map.
Yeah, look, it's a Big 12 race. It's always going to be absolutely fascinating. Guys, Willie Fritz is at Houston. Willie Fritz wins. He wins everywhere. Won at Sam Houston, won here. It won at Tulane, obviously. He's just a guy that puts together W's. I'm interested in not whether he'll leave, but how sustainable this is, frankly, at Houston, Chris.
I think this might be the worst Houston's going to be. I don't mean that there might not. I'm not saying they're going to go 7-1 every year to start the year, but you should go. If people aren't paying attention, go look at their 2026 recruiting class. It is really, really good. Keyshawn Henderson, the top quarterback recruit in America, is currently committed to Houston. They are doing an incredible job from an evaluation and recruiting standpoint there. And we know Willie Fritz's history as a coach. He wins games. I'm not saying Houston's going to dominate the Big 12 moving forward, but they're in a situation in that city where if they get this thing rolling, that could be a really, really good thing for an extended period of time because of the resources and the circumstances. You still have to sort of fix some things offensively. It's a little inconsistent, but they are so much better this year than they were last year. And I really do think they could be even better next year if they can put the kind of final pieces to bed in that recruiting class.
You know what Cincinnati and Houston have in common? They're both tied for the 3rd fewest turnovers in the country. They only have 4 turnovers. I was going to say they also
have cats as mascots.
Yeah.
But
that's right. One. Yeah. But they just protect the football, right? They don't put themselves in bad positions, giving the other offense a short field to work with. And they've just done a remarkable job in doing that. Even as you said, Houston, much more than Cincinnati, has been so inconsistent offensively and moving the ball. And what about the tight end that Houston's got? Tanner Koziel. He's marvelous to watch. 6'7", I think. He just had a 100-yard game last week. He's kind of emerged as their top target. He's got more than 40 catches this season. But yeah, as Hummer said, I don't know if this will be their worst team or whatever, but the talent is certainly going to only trend up over the next at least 2 years. And they're in a position here to not only contend for the Big 12 championship this year, but certainly next year and the year after that.
Tight end, I think, is a very interesting position when you see good tight ends, because that is a position where scouting and coaching and development is so key. Those players have to do just so much at the position. If you've got a real tight end that isn't just a bona fide slot receiver.
He's a very big slot receiver. I want to clarify this. He left Wisconsin because he was a very big slot
because
receiver.
He couldn't do the other tight end stuff. But yeah, it's just interesting when you've got good players at that position, because that's a position where, because of body types, because of mental load on the position, it can be a hard position to play. And getting the best out of a player at that position is really fascinating. It's one of the reasons why, for instance, Vanderbilt is just so interesting. They get 2 tight ends that are really good. All right, When we come back on the College Football Insiders, we're going to go inside the Insiders. It's one of our favorite times of the year. It's list season next. Welcome back to the College Football Insiders. All right, guys, it's the time of year when everybody wants to know, obviously, who is going to be their next head coach, who's going to be their next hot coordinator or what have you. Inside the Insiders this week, I think, is interesting because Chris and I are working on something that is kind of putting pen to paper of what all four of us hear all year. But particularly right now, who's hot, who's willing to move, who wants to move, who's under the radar, all this kind of stuff. Let's talk through. We won't give away the whole list because there's a lot of names on it. But let's talk about the list that me and Chris and our colleague John Talty, who's not on the recording today, are working on, which is sort of tiers of candidates that you're going to hear for different jobs. And I think, Chris, there are two types of candidates off the jump that we can kind of talk about a 30,000-foot view. There are candidates that we hear to a specific job, and their candidacy is kind of only tied to the specific job. And then there are candidates that are just kind of general for whatever reason, whether that's perceived unhappiness at their current place, whether that's the wife is an alum of certain place, or he is an alum of a certain place, or he's a mobile guy, like an upwardly mobile guy. There are different types of candidates. So, Chris, let's kind of go behind the curtain on the list that we're building right now, and all four of us kind of go around the horn about just how we hear about these kinds of guys.
Yeah, well, I think producer Aaron is sad because he heard tiers and he was like, "Let's do a segment." And I told him in the chat, there's 15 tiers. Like this is
oh
my God,
it's a rough.
This could change. This could change.
This is like one of the YouTube videos, S tier, all that stuff. Is that what we're doing?
It's a rough draft.
I think I don't know how many names, but this I think kind of speaks to the cycle. I think I'm just gonna take a big picture view of this first. We are trying to identify the crop of coaches who are going to be the coaches at the next school. And that is a really extensive list. It starts like all the way at the top. And like, I think we can all agree right now that guy is Lane Kiffin. And then there are examples of things like moonshots. There are coordinators you need to know. There are group of 5 head coaches you need to know. There are FCS coaches you need to know. And jobs we're talking about. We're talking about everything from Kent State to LSU. Like those are very different jobs and very different requirements. And we're trying to largely, we're going to miss some, like some of these, especially smaller MAC jobs, and have a very interesting pool of candidates. But the idea is if a coach can be a head coach somewhere else this cycle, even if they're a sitting head coach, we want to identify them and put them in a category. And we'll have that at a later date this week. We haven't exactly decided, I would imagine Thursday. But Richard, I'll let you run through a couple tiers if you want to.
Yeah. We have our coordinators to know, which is a chunky section. Some of my favorite kind of categories that we have right now, and again, evolving document, is one of them. I won't name the coach in there, but it's the "what's he waiting for?" ? That's literally one coach. But there's another one, which is looking for the next Kurt Cignetti, right? We just talked about Willie Fritz. We just talked about the kind of coach that he is, a guy who has won everywhere at all levels. And it's a short group of guys, but that list of guys, Brandon, I think is so interesting about the current future of college football right now. Because look, you can do all these coordinator projections, you know all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, Willie Fritz, Bob Chesney, Casey Killer, and Lance Leipold have won at literally every level of the sport you can possibly win at. And so it's their candidacies, I think, that are most fascinating.
Yeah, the other question is, it's like we were talking about Houston in the previous segment, like would Willie Fritz want to leave? Because I know even at Tulane before he left, his name was starting to come up a little bit. And even then he was kind of hesitant about some things. And I'm sure as you guys go through the tier, because I haven't seen this list at all, but there's some names that I've been hearing just this week that are like people think they're projecting as maybe that new potential type of Cignetti or that, like a Willie Fritz type, who aren't necessarily up there in age as them, but they have won at multiple levels or have been part of similar systems under coaches who they followed at multiple levels. And I think those are the type of guys you might be hearing more about myself here as we get later in the process, especially if some schools, like say a UCLA or a Virginia Tech or an Arkansas or even an Oregon for that matter, start to like get down their list and realize, man, our candidate pool is just a little shallow. But I don't know. Like Willie Fritz, I think he could go anywhere and just be successful. I think he's very much I hate comparing coaches, but he is very much that Signetti range of he's an older coach. He's got that kind of blueprint. It works everywhere he goes. And we've seen it now, as Chris mentioned in a previous segment, got the recruiting chops and has the staff to do so no matter where they go.
Yeah, Matt, I think, and I'm not necessarily asking you to name names, but there are some coaches in this group, I think, that are, on this list, I should say, that are reset button potential guys. And again, when you've got a guy like, for different reasons, you might want to hit the reset button, right? Like we've got in this category, for instance, we've got Shane Beamer, right? Who might want to hit the reset button in South Carolina and go to, as crazy as it sounds to me personally, like you hear the connection between him and Virginia Tech for obvious reasons. That's one. And then you've got a guy like Dave Aranda, Jonathan Smith, like those are guys in that category that may be kind of outrunning the posse, so to speak, Matt.
Yeah, there are a lot of different categories for me. Like we've talked about some of the retreads already, including some of the guys that would fall in that category that were just like recently, like James Franklin and Billy Napier, that could factor into jobs as soon as this cycle. You also have the Pat Fitzgeralds of the world who currently out of it, who is definitely an interview guy at different places at the P4 level right now and could end up getting one of these types of jobs. As far as coordinator type guys, one of the interesting ones to keep an eye on would be Pete Golding at Ole Miss. If hypothetically Lane Kiffin leaves for another job, there are people at Ole Miss that think extremely highly of Pete Golding, and I do think that he would be a candidate and possibility for that job. You also have some coaches at the P4 level who are doing things that are not standard for those types of schools that have put themselves on the radar for bigger jobs, whether it's a Brent Key at Georgia Tech, who I do think could be a candidate and somewhat of interest for, let's say, hypothetically, an Auburn if that opens, considering his ties to the state of Alabama and just overall the success continues to have at Georgia Tech. We'll see if he ends up being in play at a place like Florida to go along with that. But yeah, there are some other ones that would fall in that kind of category along with him, as far as coaches that are doing things that are not standard for the school that they're at and has put them on the radar for people in the administrator world. And then obviously a popular one that people love to talk about are the G5 head coaches that are putting themselves in line for bigger jobs. And some of the obvious ones to throw out are some of the ones currently in the American with John Summerall, Ryan Silverfield, and Alex Golish. And then Bob Chesney is another one who's going to be a possibility and an interview person for P4 stuff this cycle. And Virginia Tech's one that immediately sticks out that makes a lot of sense for him to at the very least be a possibility and a candidate for. And I'll give you one for not this cycle, but for down the road. Most people probably don't know who this is, but a coach who's continued to come up on my end recently, just someone to keep an eye on for moving forward, is someone named Brad Spencer, who's at a D3 school right now, North Central, I think it is. But if you go and pull up his Wikipedia page, you'll see some of the background on him. And the guy has been head coach there for 4 years now. I think this is year 4. And he's like 51-1 as the head coach there. His previous 3 seasons have all ended in national championship game appearances. Has won 2 of those 3 national title games. Could very well end up winning a 3rd national title game this year in year 4. But what makes him interesting, just as a name to monitor for moving forward, is not only the head coaching success, but he's also the offensive play caller there, and they're averaging like 50 points a game. So, like I said, not necessarily this cycle in terms of a P4 and FBS job, but he's someone who started to come up some in conversations for me recently, and just as someone to pay attention to for moving forward. And the reason that came to mind was just you bringing up the Lance Leipold part of it. Lance obviously started off at the D3 level and worked his way up from there. So that led to that just coming to mind, and him currently being a D3 guy and just actually being compared some to like Lance and Andy Kotelnicki, who started off at the D3 level and ultimately working up, and both of those guys obviously being at a higher point now.
Yeah, you mentioned that. I was going to mention, I want to throw this out there. I don't know what the list looks like. You guys have been working on it, but it's fascinating. I feel like I'm opening a Christmas present. You guys talking about all these names. But like if Wisconsin were to open up, I think they actually got some interesting potential there as far as names that are really great coaches. You mentioned Lance Leipold. He's got, he coached at Wisconsin Whitewater. The name I was hearing this week, and I'm just wondering if it's like too soon just because they just left a job, is Jake Dickert at Wake Forest. He's got them at 5-2 right now. He was obviously very successful there at Washington State.
Chris put him on the list.
I mean, he's someone that came up this week and talking to some agents.
Hey, he's a Midwest guy. Don't forget about that part. I
don't know if Jake Dickert's going to make our list, but it is an interesting one. Wisconsin also, like I think of a Jason Eck who has deep ties to the state. I'm not saying Jake Dickert doesn't do a really good job. I just don't know if he's ready to move this cycle. Although a new head coaching job like Wisconsin coming open can always change the calculus.
Yeah, you know what I left out, by the way, that I should not have left out while talking about coaches excelling right now in the American. Eric Morris is doing a hell of a job, and that's someone else who offensive play caller.
Oh, yeah.
With what he's doing as a head coach. Eric's going to be a factor potentially, and says some things more level this cycle. Impressive what he's done.
Oklahoma State, Arkansas.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's definitely a factor at those. I do want to say, like, if we're just talking random, like not random, if we're talking coaches you should know on lower levels, like Chris McCullough at UT Permian Basin is the all-time winningest coach in college football history under age 30. He started a Division III school. Somebody I've written about before. I think he's 6-2 at UTPB, a program that basically didn't exist 5 years ago, and now is a pretty consistent power there. He's going to get some looks over time. So you gotta, if you're an athletic director, you gotta turn over some stones.
GJ Kinney. He's got another GJ Kinney coming up. Is that what it is?
We got GJ on there. I've got a guy, Tremaine Jackson. He was one of my ads to the list. He's a guy who won at Colorado Mesa and won at Valdosta State, and is now winning at Prairie View A&M in his first year in the SWAC. I mean, they may be in line to go to the Celebration Bowl this year. So that's
a guy last year that lost the national championship game to Ferris State, a program we should be familiar with because of Trinidad Chimbliss.
Exactly.
I wrote about Tremaine last year as well. Like, great coach, and there's a lot of these guys out there.
And what I think matters here is how wide the net is going to be, especially for some of the G6 jobs that are going to come open because of guys who get poached, right? Like if you're a G6 job, for instance, Rice spoke to Tremaine last year, for instance. Like, why Rice hired Scott Abel? Like, why wouldn't you, if you're Rice, cast the net as wide as humanly possible because of the situation of what your school is? It's different than LSU, who can call one guy probably and get him to come, for instance.
I was talking to an AD earlier this week about the bigger jobs that are open, and not necessarily at Florida and LSU, but he was telling me like what he would do in this instance. And he's at a bigger program, and he was like, I would certainly call those type of people, but I would not wait that stuff out. I would be digging and have been doing my research on who are the next type of Dan Lannings out there that are coordinators that have been in systems that have worked so freaking well, that has a clear vision of what they want their program to be, that has some personality, that is fiery and is really charged up about wanting to be a head coach and is younger. That's the type of coach they'd be looking for. They wouldn't be looking for a guy that's, they're winning at like Ole Miss right now or whatever. And yes, they're the hot name. And yes, maybe I can win with them. But do I want to have to maybe wait till after this transfer portal period and put my program in a hole potentially for a year and wait till year 2 until I see the results I want with a Lane Kiffin type?
Yeah, it's what wins in this next era for different kinds of jobs. But what wins in this next era, I think, is going to be fascinating. You're in the thick of the rev share era. We just talked about a team like Houston and Virginia and Indiana, right? Like, I'm not saying that those teams don't have resources. They clearly do. But they are winning because they have scouted and developed and coached. And I know that in a five-star heavy era, you want just shiny things. You want shiny players. But even if you take the best teams in the country right now, those teams have a foundation of high school players that are good, and then they go and they take portal pieces judiciously to fill holes on their roster. So Ohio State did last year. It's what Indiana and Oregon have done this year, for instance. And what that affords you is the ability to whiff. Oregon whiffed on Mekhi Hughes. No two ways about it.
Right.
But guess what? Dyer Hill's a sick player.
Yeah.
And they're able to roll him.
Oh, yeah, and OU whiffed on Jaden Knott.
Like it whiffs happen, misses happen, whether they happen because you misevaluated or you got sold a bill of goods or what have you. I'm not going to say. But at the end of the day, misses in evaluation happens. And when you miss an evaluation, what then happens? Are you able to fill with a player who may be a little young but can go? Or do you have a situation like Florida State where you fill with players who can't go and it becomes 2-10?
I'd argue whiffing.
That's one of the problems that Auburn's facing because of the quarterback situation.
Well, I'd argue whiffing's a little easier if you have Oregon's bankroll, to be honest.
Right.
Because I think Oklahoma, like, one of the big problems this year is John Napier has no help. And if you put the 7 figures that went to Jaden Knott, around that at least, into an offensive lineman or a receiver, Oklahoma might look a little different this year.
Yeah. It's interesting. All right. Our list comes out tomorrow. Well, I don't know about tomorrow, but we will put not tomorrow. All right. Our list is not coming out tomorrow. Sorry, you heard it here first.
I'll have a story tomorrow.
Brandon's got a story tomorrow. Brandon, what you got?
I've got a story coming out on whether LSU firing Brian Kelly will deter programs in that region, Florida State and Auburn, into rethinking their situation at the end of the year, and whether they should stick with their coach or if they're going to live in a vacuum and decide we just need to move on if things are bad enough.
I think, man, I mean, and we've talked about it. Like, I think Wisconsin, Florida State, I mean, they're begging, man. They are just begging to give us a couple, man. Give us a couple W's coming home here, and we can end the season.
And it's not just a money thing. Everybody assumes it's a money thing. It legit is. There's concerns about just the candidate pool, and there is still concerns among athletic directors about winning the freaking press conference. That's still a thing for them.
Auburn, the 4th or 5th best job if it opens.
Oh gosh, currently with the jobs that are open,
so Penn State, Florida, LSU.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Is it the 4th? I was kind of thinking in my head if Florida State comes open too, but of the
it's
4,
4.
It's 4, right?
Yeah, I think it's better than Florida State. If that comes open.
Matt, what do you think?
I would put it on a similar level as Florida. Like, you can make an argument that Florida's a better job than Auburn. You can also make an argument that Auburn's a better job than Florida. I would put them in a similar category.
I do too. Like, when we start to, and not to absolutely derail us, but like when we talk about ranking jobs, I'm just like, dude, is it in the Power 2? Is it in the upper half of the Power 2? And like, can you get to the playoff? Because like, you're going to sit here and tell me that Florida's a better job than Vanderbilt. Sure. Vanderbilt may very well play for the college football playoff. You're going to tell me Penn State's a better job than Indiana. Sure. Indiana may go to its 2nd college football playoff in a row. Like, I understand.
Yeah, but we're talking about the best coaches. Like, if you pick wrong, Billy Napier picked wrong. It derailed his career.
I get it. I get it. But like, that's what I mean. Like, what is in this current next iteration of college football? What really is picking?
That's the thing, because we could talk all about resources and facilities and everything. Because like, I was having this conversation yesterday with someone and said, what would a Nebraska do if Matt Rule did leave for Penn State? One, it'd be an absolute backhanded slap to the alumni there and to the fan base and everything. they've got maybe the best facility in all the country right now that they just opened up recently. The fan base is gigantic. They've got a lot of good money in that situation. And of course, they've just struggled the last 10 to 15 years. But Matt Rule's finally getting it going a little bit right now. And if he were to leave, like, who do you get? Like, you could argue here, we're going to put on a piece of paper everything you have here, but we're not going to tell you what the school is. And you go, I want that job. But because it's Nebraska right now, it makes it a more difficult sell.
Somebody is going to lose the press conference. That's
yes,
just
definitely
going to happen. Now, again, and we talked about this on Sunday on our Bryant Kelly emergency show. Like, just because you lose the press conference does not mean you are going to win or lose games. I understand everybody looks at the my family thing, and we will make fun of it forever. But at the end of the day, if he would have won games, it wouldn't have mattered. And it would have been a very funny thing that we say, and it is what it is. At the end of the day, we understand what this is. It is a bottom line business. And I personally don't think winning the press conference should matter. But Brandon, I know that we all talk to athletic directors who have to answer to boosters, have to answer to people. My counter to that is always athletic director X. If they're going to fire you anyway, you might as well just hire somebody.
I've been talking to athletic directors for this story anonymously, and they're obviously much more open to be quoted as a result of it. And even the buyout story I did a couple weeks ago, and like everything you're saying is like, I would love to be able to work like that.
Yeah.
But they can't.
Yeah.
Most of them just can't because of the board of trustees and their president and their fan bases. It's just, they are the product of the system, and they are just going down the pipeline and being put together. And when they come out, you just hope it works.
I mean, UNC found that out the extremely hard way, for instance. UNC
the board of trustees going, hey, Bubba, we got this, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting as things move forward. All right. That's been the show. Thanks for joining us here on the College Football Insiders. I am your host, Richard Johnson, joined by my guys, Chris Hummer, Brandon Marcello, and Matt Zenitz. We will see you Thursday.